Everyone, in this video lecture, we are going to be talking about transport of molecules through the cell membrane, also known as cell transport. When talking about cell transport, there are two types of movement through a cell membrane. The first type of cell transport is referred to as passive. So all transport is going to either be determined as passive, or in a minute we're going to see the other type of transport called active. So what makes movement through the cell membrane considered to be passive? Well, if you think about just what that word means in general, to be a passive person or you're sitting passively, it means you're lacking energy. So it's a type of movement of molecules through the cell membrane that does not require any energy whatsoever to do it. And there are three then types of passive transport. And we're going to talk about each of these: diffusion, osmosis, and facilitated diffusion. The opposite, if you will, of passive transport through the cell membrane then would be molecules that go through active transport. This means that to move these molecules through the cell membrane, there is energy required, and the energy is in the form of ATP. There are three types of active transport. There are protein pumps, there's endo and exocytosis. So we're going to talk about all of these different types of movement of molecules through the cell membrane and why they do or do not need energy. So let's go through the types of passive transport first. So the first type of passive transport is diffusion. And this is the movement of small, very, very small molecules from a high to low concentration through your cell membrane. So if we have a cell membrane that separates the inside of the cell from the outside of the cell, on one side, there should be a high concentration of these really small molecules. Molecules like oxygen, carbon dioxide, things that are very tiny in size. So there's a lot of them on one side of the membrane, so there's a high concentration. And then on the other side of the membrane, there's a low concentration or less of the molecules. Molecules naturally want to move from high to low. They want to spread out. They want to achieve an equilibrium. So if there's too much of the molecule on one side, the molecules will pass through the cell membrane to make an even amount of molecules on both sides. And so because they are small molecules, they have the ability to fit through little gaps or spaces between the phospholipids in the cell membrane. So this does not require any energy whatsoever. This is just happening with the flow of these molecules from high to low. Osmosis is a type of diffusion. So this is, again, moving from high to low concentration. But what separates this type of diffusion is that the movement involves water molecules in particular. So water is moving through a cell membrane, and again, it's moving from where there's high concentration of the water molecules to where there's a lower concentration. So in this little example here, we have a membrane. It's not a cell membrane, but it is a semi-permeable membrane that's dividing this jug of water in half. So on the left half is just pure water molecules. On the right half of the container is sugar and water molecules. And on the left side, we can see that there are more water molecules than on the right side. So what happens is water is going to move from high to low. So the water will move from the left side through the membrane to the right side, and that will end up raising the volume of the liquid because those sugar molecules are quite large, taking up more space. So the water moved from high to low. The last type of passive transport is called facilitated diffusion. This is the movement of molecules through a cell membrane, again from high to low concentration. However, they're moving this time through a protein. The protein facilitates the diffusion. That is because these molecules are a little bit bigger in size. They can't fit through the cell membrane on their own. They don't fit through those little pore spaces. So they need to then pass through a protein channel, which is like a tunnel going all the way through the cell membrane. But again, because it is moving from high to low concentration, that still makes it a type of diffusion. So, all of those types of transport we just talked about do not require any energy to move through the membrane. They will happen on their own. But molecules that can't simply diffuse, they're not moving from high to low concentration, or maybe just they're so large they can't even fit through a simple protein channel, then energy is required to move those molecules across the cell membrane. And the energy molecule of the cell is ATP. So ATP is necessary to make those molecules move through the cell membrane. So there are two kind of reasons that energy might be required, and it might be required to pump molecules against the concentration gradient. So molecules might need to go from where there's less of the molecule to where there's more. And that won't happen naturally. So energy is going to be required to make that movement happen. And again, some molecules might just be way too large, so energy will be required to get them in or out of the cell. So, the first type of active transport is protein pumps. So, protein pumps are proteins that are embedded in the cell membrane, and they're using energy to physically push or force the molecules against their concentration gradient. Molecules want to go from where there's less to where there's more. Again, that does not happen naturally, so ATP energy will help push those molecules through the protein. The last two types of active transport are endo and exocytosis. These are grouped together because they are, in essence, the same process. However, the endo and exo at the beginning of these terms just refers to the direction of the movement. The root of endocytosis, endo, refers to entering the cell, whereas exo refers to exiting. So both of these processes involve basically forming little vesicles of cell membrane around a very, very large item that is either trying to get into or out of the cell. So, in the little GIF in the corner, you can see that the large molecule comes into contact with the membrane. The membrane sort of bubbles around it and pinches off, forming this little vesicle or little bubble around the really large molecule. And this type of transport does require energy to allow that little vesicle to form, getting that large item in or out of the cell. So, again, if it's endocytosis, that item is entering into the cell. If it's exocytosis, the molecule is exiting the cell. And so then the last thing to think about is how this movement of molecules through the cell membrane helps cells maintain homeostasis. So homeostasis is a state of being relatively the same. So when we're looking at molecules on the outside and inside of the cell, we want the concentration of these molecules to be pretty equal between outside of the cell and inside of the cell. So, cell transport is going to help molecules achieve that equilibrium. We want the amount of a molecule outside the cell to eventually equal the amount of the molecule inside of the cell to reach homeostasis, that state of equilibrium. So, cell transport is going to help achieve homeostasis.